Good morning, Prima. Mr. Oldman here. I have the great privilege today of speaking about one of my favorite people on earth, one of my biggest heroes, and hopefully enlightening you on a role in the war that was very unknown, a role that required someone to take care of horses, a role within the war that only one man I know could perform. I introduce you today to John James McDonald, in hopes that you learn a little bit more about my great papa and come to understand why he is a hero to me. Born in England just before the turn of the century, John James McDonald joined the army at the age of 16. Lying about his age, by law he should have been 17. And with his father's permission and his mother's tears, John joined the artillery. World War I had just begun at this time. Privately owned horses used to deliver milk and other goods were taken by the government. John hoped and prayed that he would have a chance to get Jerry, whom he loved and for 5 years in his hometown was used to pull on the egg wagon. John already had good years as a rider and was given the job of leading a team of 6 horses in the wheeled artillery division. Much to his delight, John was not only given Jerry, but Rooney as well, a 5-year-old mare that was also from his hometown. If you can imagine the start of World War I, a young man lying about his age, only to take his hometown horses into war, to be able to serve the front line with new goods, bandages, as well as bring those hurt, injured, or dead back from the front line. Further to that, these horses would carry thousands of pounds of ammunition and armaments like artillery to the front line in order to push back the enemy advance. Food was scarce and was given only out in the early mornings. Soldiers received a quarter of a scone loaf, butter, and some jam. These items were to last the men for the day. And for breakfast, they were given 2 pieces of bacon. For the bread and jam, if you were smart enough to save some of your bread and jam, would maybe get you into lunch, as lunch was always stew. They had tea at every meal, and sometimes a nice pudding. John tells me, for a 16-year-old boy with a big appetite, this was probably the toughest part of war for him. A day that hasn't been forgotten while in France for John was the first time that he had ever seen one of his chums dying, and John knelt down by his side to be with him. His sergeant, pulling on him by the sleeve, said, come on now. The war won't stop for one man, laddie." 3 years later, before returning to England, John decided that no soldier should be without tattoos. So during his stay in Egypt, he received a tattoo of a sphinx in one arm, and quickly remembering his mother's tears, soon had a heart with the word mother tattooed on the other arm. John came to Canada a short time after the First War. He married an English girl named Anne and came to live in Toronto. John was ready to serve Canada, this time during World War II. And before the war, he belonged to a militia, a group of men preparing to defend our country. Again, John wanted to serve. He went overseas, but before doing so, he had to lie in the opposite direction to get enlisted, as this time he was considered too old. He served 4 more years, receiving one of the highest honored medals, the MBE, which means a member of the British Empire. John is now no longer with us. He has been gone for many decades. But in his 70s, he still tried to care about his neighbors and the freedoms of all Canadians. In his retirement years, he tried to travel as much as possible. Spain was one of his favorite countries. He still had a soft spot for Egypt, though, after his years of service. And he enjoyed the new math curriculum in the 70s, and always told his grandkids that it really wasn't new at all. He loved ice cream, meat pies, and of course, his budgie with his English accent. He hated spaghetti, and he was kind to cats, but doesn't really like them. He has a sparkle of a happy man in his eyes. John is my great-grandfather. I call him Great Papa, and I love him very much. Thank you, John.